First of all, good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. Hopefully after that fine lunch, I won't put you to sleep, but we're talking about money, so maybe that'll, sort of keep people awake. I'm Bob Pickering. I am the director of the Master's Level Museum Science and Management program at University of Tulsa and professor in the anthropology department. But maybe more to the point for this afternoon's session, I've spent a lot of time over my career writing grants for probably 15 years, almost 20 years. I've been a grant reviewer for IMLS and NEH. And certainly, should you be interested in grant writing, one of the best ways to learn how to write a grant is to read other people's grant proposals. You'll learn a lot. You learn good things and you learn some not so good things. In addition to that, I've written quite a large number of grants over my career. And one of the classes that I teach at the University of Tulsa in the Museum Science and Management program is a grant writing class. And kind of what makes that special is I got a grant for the grant writing class. So the students write for real money. Essentially, I pair the student with a local museum in Tulsa, and I talk to the director, and we agree on a project that's about the right scope for the project. And then the student really is the one who does all the work, does all the work with staff, does the timeline, does the budget, writes the narrative, everything. And at the end of the semester, if all goes well, and it really should all go well, the student gets to put on their resume that they have written a successful proposal from the Weber Foundation, and the host institution gets a check for $2,000. So that's about as close to a real life museum experience as I can provide in grant writing. And I will tell you, from my standpoint, it's a fun course to teach. I don't know if the students would tell you that. It's certainly one that they're very engaged in, and they get it because they know there's real money on the line. And essentially, it's something that will advance their careers. One of the things I tell the students is, I don't really care what your job title is. If you can write successful grants, you're a step ahead of everybody else in that job title. So I really do see it as a benefit. Well, it's actually because of the grant or not the grant writing, but the grant reviewing that I've done for IMLS and NEH, that I came up with these 12 steps for writing competitive grant proposals. About 5 years ago, I was reading a group of proposals which, to me, in an unusual way, they didn't really seem to be that good, and that's rare for IMLS and NEH. So in a fit of pique, I guess, I came up with what I thought were 12 steps that you needed to be able to write a competitive grant proposal, regardless of who you're writing it to, whether it was a federal agency, a private funder, that if you could answer these 12 questions, then you essentially put that information in the format of whatever the grant asks you to do, and you should have a competitive proposal. And I will tell you that I now do this for my own grant proposals. What I do first is sit down and try to answer these 12 questions. And once I've got those complete, then that's sort of my little cheat sheet, if you will, for writing the actual proposal. So let's go ahead and start. Well, as you can see, grant writing is a key element for support. We all work in the museum world. We know it's a not-for-profit world. There's that famous line in A Streetcar Named Desire that says, I depend on the kindness of strangers. Well, we kind of do that too. We depend on the kindness of donors who think we're doing something worthwhile and that what we're doing is something that they would like to support. So that's very important. And I will tell you that the easy part of writing grant proposals is actually writing the proposal. The hard part is knowing what to write, and that can be more complicated sometimes than we think. The first question, I think, is what do you want to do? You know, what is the project that you want to work on? The second question backs up the first question, why do you want to do it? You know, every museum has needs. Not every need needs a grant to make it happen. A question you should ask yourself for writing a grant proposal is, why is this project that you're writing a grant for, why is that the top priority right now? I mean, every museum has projects, every museum has priorities. But I will tell you, if you can tell your potential funder that your institution has decided that this is the most pressing need right now, that's part of a powerful argument. If you can simply say, well, we thought we'd write for this grant because we thought it was a good idea, or somebody told us we needed to do this, that's not an argument you want to make. That's not going to get you anywhere. Who made the decision as to why you want to write this proposal and do this project? Is this made by the major stakeholders in your museum, meaning the trustees, the administration, maybe the staff, but it also may come from the community? So why do you want to do this project, and why are you looking for grant funding to do it? Well, there are some very good reasons why you would write grants. First of all, is it a mandated legal need? Is there something in your institution that is so deficient? Maybe it's a safety issue that's so deficient, or maybe your HVAC system isn't working and you've got to replace that, or all of your textiles and all of your documents are going to turn into mold. Well, if you've got that kind of problem, then that's something you need money for. Now, the question of whether or not you write a grant proposal for it can become a little more complicated. Well, is this one person's idea? All of you probably work in the museum world, and all of you probably worked with a fellow staff member or a director or a trustee who came up to you and said, you know what, you really need to do X. And you're trying to smile all the time this person is saying that, when you really know, no, that's not a priority for the institution. That's a pet project for someone. Pet projects can be good for the institution, but you need to be able to demonstrate that that pet project of one person is in fact something that's really important to the institution. Sometimes you realize you need to write a grant because the audience is telling you, we want this program, we want this activity, we want you, the museum, to do something, and you may not have the resources to do it. So in that sense, you're trying to really fill a need. Here's an example. I'm at Tulsa and at the Gilcrease, and at an opening event for an exhibit, a supporter from the community, not a board member, who lives in a rural part of Oklahoma, came up to me and said, why don't you guys do anything for rural schools in Oklahoma? You know, kids in rural schools, they don't get to see museums, they don't get to see exhibits, they don't get to see artwork. Why don't you do something for them? And probably in a not particularly politic way, I said, because we don't have any money. It's not our mandate to serve rural schools. Well, I was a little more polite than that. But what we really discussed was, it really was not a mandate of the museum to serve rural schools. We were not set up to serve rural schools. We were set up to serve Tulsa schools and the community. So by the end of this discussion, this gentleman said, what if I provide the resources to help you do this? Would that become a priority? Well, to be honest, it was not a priority of the education department. They had a pretty full plate, but it was kind of my priority. I thought it was a good idea. I thought, having come from a rural environment myself, that to have Gilcrease or any museum take the show on the road and go into rural communities could be a good thing. But I'm not naive enough to believe that it wouldn't cost money to make it happen. There was no program. There was no rural school initiative. So long story short, we turned that question into an idea, which became a plan and then a proposal. So make sure when you're thinking about these things, you're funding the right thing. You fund a plan. You don't really fund an idea. Sometimes you do things because it sounds like fun. Good luck if you have that luxury. It's not a common thing. Is the project part of a long-term plan? That's a really important point, and that assumes your institution does strategic planning and is looking for the future to how your institution is going to continue to serve its audiences and carry out the mission that your museum has. Third question, is this a continuation or a transformation of your institution? I'll tell you from experience that funding a new initiative is very different from funding a continuing program. Well, why is that? Well, a continuation simply helps you maintain or maybe enhance something that you're already doing. It's an identified audience need, perhaps. It's something that your institution is known for. So the proposal that you would write for a continuation is going to be telling the potential funder that you're already doing really good work, you've got a good response from the audiences, and that without their support, this continued project that the community likes may be in jeopardy. If you're writing about a transformational project, and in this case, this, as we call it, Gilcrease on Wheels, serving rural communities, was fairly transformational. It took us in a direction that we had not necessarily planned to go, although it was certainly within the general mission of serving the school children of Oklahoma. If you're going to do something transformational, you really need to have all of the stakeholders in line, the board, the administration, the staff, and the community, because you're going to fundamentally try to change your institution. Okay, how did you decide that this is the most important thing to be done now? Okay, as I say, there are lots of things you can do, there are lots of things you might do, there are lots of things you could do, but deciding what is the best thing now is a really critical element, and it gets to sort of how your institution functions. So one of the first questions, or first ways to address this question is, does front-end evaluation tell you this project is needed? Well, that kind of implies that your institution does visitor surveys, that you know what your audience wants and thinks. And I will tell you from many, many years in the museum field, I think it's critical for museums to understand who the audiences are for their institution. And I gave a talk on this morning, and I will tell you that in my mind, audience is not a singular, audience is a plural. No museum I know has only one audience. Every museum I know tries to serve multiple audiences. So we need to be querying our audiences, we need to be listening to our audiences, and front-end evaluation helps us determine some of those things. Also, if you're going to do a project, regardless of what it is, you've got a lot of homework to do before you ever start writing the proposal. You've got to determine what does it take in your institution to make this project that you want to find funding for. What's it going to take to make that project successful? Do you have the facilities? Do you have the staff? Do you have the other resources that will help you do this? Are the staff and trustees in agreement that this is the best thing? If the staff and the board do not agree that the project you're thinking about is a great idea, maybe that's telling you this is not the highest priority right now. That could lead to problems. Okay, as I was saying, do you have all the necessary resources other than money to be successful? You know, sort of the old adage is, if you've got money, people, time, and space, the rest is easy. You can do anything. Almost none of us in the museum have all of those resources, and sometimes not even a majority. A serious question to ask is, how will this proposed project impact current workloads of your existing staff? If you do this project, who's going to do the work? Is it going to be someone who's already on your staff, or is it implied, or is it actually written into the proposal that you're going to have to hire new people to do that task? Well, that's an important institutional decision. Same thing with space. Can you accommodate whatever this project is that you want to do? And there's sort of no right or wrong answer. It's that you have to actually provide an answer, because it may be that in this proposal for this wonderful new project that you're going to do, you know you need outside assistance. Certainly in 2016, almost every museum I know in one form or another is trying to digitize its collections and put those collections online. You know, that's not an expertise that virtually any museum had 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and some of us don't have that expertise in our institutions today. So if you're trying to, let's say, digitize your collections, then immediately you're probably talking about staff with new expertise that's not already on your staff. You're probably talking about some additional equipment that you need, and having worked through the Gilcrease, it can be considerable. And you probably need additional space that's not already dedicated to something else. So the right answer to the question, do you have all the necessary resources, is to sit down with whoever the players are within your institution and really ask the serious questions. What's it going to take to make this happen? What do we actually need? And I will tell you that grant reviewers, and virtually all foundations have grant reviewers, grant reviewers will look at your proposal to see if your institution has the capacity to do the project that you want to do. Let's say you work in a big museum. You work in a, Kansas City, the Joslin, or you work at, Denver Art Museum or whatever. And your annual budget for the institution may be $25, $30 million. And that the project you're talking about is a $200,000 project. On the surface, it would appear that probably you're capable of doing that. $200,000 project in a museum that spends annually $20 million to do whatever it does? Sure. What if it's the reverse? What if you are an institution that has a $200,000 annual budget and you're asking to do $1 million project? The grant reviewers may ask you about capacity. Are you truly capable of doing this thing with the limited people, space, whatever that you might have? That's a very legitimate question, because in this day and age, reviewers, funders want accountability, and you have to be able to demonstrate that. So it's important to put that in your proposal up front. That's the other thing to really say, I think, at this point. When you're thinking about doing a proposal, your biggest allies are the program officers in the foundation that you want to work with. Here's the secret. They're all there to give away money, and they know it. And so you're not going to sneak up on them by asking them for money. In fact, they're going to help you find the way through the grant writing process to get that money. So instead of having this fear, and I know this sometimes happens with grant writing, people feel a lot of stress over writing a grant. Instead of feeling it being stressful, think about that grant officer in that funding agency as being your ally, someone who's going to help you work through the process, because that's really what they do. Okay, does your plan clearly and succinctly describe how its objectives will be achieved? Remember, again, when you're writing a grant proposal, you're funding a plan. You're not funding an idea. And that means that you have worked out in advance all of the details. And you need to say what you're going to say in clear, simple language. What do I mean by that? Well, if you use a lot of acronyms, and any of you who work with federal agencies know that there are lots of acronyms, the grant reviewers may not know those acronyms. They don't know as much about your project as you do. So when you're writing a proposal, you want to write as clearly and succinctly as possible in simple language. That doesn't mean dumbing down. That doesn't mean writing in a dull fashion. That's not a good thing. But it means being as clear as you can. And you want to show accountability. If you say you want to do something, or you're going to do something as part of this proposal, how are people going to know that you've done it other than you saying it? Is there some way to account for that? Help the reviewers understand the importance of the project. One of the biggest tasks, I think, in writing a good grant proposal is communicating with whoever is going to be doing the reviewing of that document. They want to help you. I can guarantee you that. As I said, you know more about the project than they do. So your job is to help the grant reviewer understand why your project is the most important thing your institution can do right now. Does that make sense? There are some big mistakes, though, that you can make doing this, and I've seen this in lots of grants that I review. The big mistake of first-time grant writers is they use way too many adjectives. Our project is going to be better than sliced bread. This is going to put us on the map. We're going to be the greatest museum ever. No, not so. The project is going to do something fairly specific for your institution, for your audiences. You want to present it in a positive way, but using too much hyperbole, using too many adjectives actually kind of diminishes your argument. Instead of using adjectives, use examples. We're going to do this project, and here's what it's going to do for this audience, and here's what it's going to do for another audience, so that you can help the reviewer see how your project is really going to make your museum a better place, and maybe more importantly, going to help your audiences have a better experience. Okay? Also, by doing this, by working out all of these details, it shows that your staff has done its homework. It has all of the details. You have already sort of answered the questions that the reviewer might have. Okay? Which means that when you're writing a proposal, usually one person has the job of actually writing the proposal, but you may want other people in the institution to read the proposal who are not necessarily as familiar with the project as you are, and see if they have any questions about what you've said. Is it clear and understandable to them as to what you're trying to do? If someone in your own institution can't determine what you're asking for or how you're going to do it, then probably you've got a little more writing and editing to do. Okay? In that regard, it's important to tell the funder who's going to do the work. One of the errors that I often see in proposals is the staff will do this. Well, the staff is sort of generic. Who is going to do this? Is this going to be educator X in the education department? Is this going to be curator Y who's going to do this? Is this a task that's going to take a curator, an educator, and a registrar to pull this off? By naming positions, if not names, and it's not bad to do both, it says we know who's going to do this work, and we know and are accounting for how this work is already going to fit in to our current workflow. Does that make sense? So you're not simply saying, oh, magically, the grant fairies are going to drop by and they're going to do this stuff that we want to have done. No, that's a bad idea. You need to be as specific as possible. Is your timeline reasonable and reliable? Grant reviewers will definitely look to see if your plan is achievable in the time and with the resources that you have. You know, if you're going to build a new wing onto your museum and you're going to add 5 new exhibits and you're going to have 10 new interactives, don't tell them you're going to have this done in 9 to 12 months. That's not going to happen. I can guarantee you that. Let me give you another example. This is a bad example from an institution I used to work at, which shall go nameless. Okay? This institution had great collections of ethnographic material and was pretty good at getting grants to fix upgrade the housing of delicate ethnographic collections. The problem was, the feeling was, in order to get a better shot at getting the proposal, you should sort of lowball the amount of money that you're asking for. Good idea? Bad idea. What happens in a situation like that is, yes, you may get the grant, but then you're saddled with the work to actually finish the job. And if you ask for too little money for a project, then what do you do with the project that's left at the end of the money? Does your own host institution have to now magically come up with the extra money to complete that project? Could be. Another example from an institution I used to work at, we had a donor who was adamant that we needed to do a particular project, and he was willing to put up $10,000 to make this project happen. Well, we were thrilled until 3 or 4 of us who would have been involved in this project sat down and actually costed out what the project would take. How many hours, who's involved, what's it gonna do? Bottom line, this was a project that was gonna cost probably between $100,000 and $130,000, for which this person was gonna put up $10,000. What if we said yes to that offer? Then the institution is saddled with either raising a great deal more money that it had not planned to raise, or by doing an inadequate version of that project, neither of which we were intending to do. We attempted to work with the donor and offered him some other projects that were in the price range, the $10,000 range, that we thought were important, that were related to what he seemed to be interested in. And bottom line, sometimes things don't work out. He didn't like any of our options. He was upset because we wouldn't do his project, but I feel that the museum made the right decision in turning down his grant, or his offer of a grant, because it could not possibly have been accomplished for the money that was on the table. And that would have been a very bad precedent. So you need to make sure that when you're planning a project that you have worked out all the steps. Often when we get to the point where we sort of have a bullet point list of what the project is, a group of us will sit down together and literally walk through the project. You know, what's the space that this entails? Who are the people who will be doing what work? You know, what has to happen first, and then second and third, and to work out any critical timelines that happen to be involved in this particular project, so that hopefully, as a group internally, we have asked and answered the questions that a reviewer is going to ask if we aren't careful. Does that make sense? We want to be our own most strict reviewers. Will the project continue after the grant? Lots of reviewers will ask the question. In fact, it may be an actual question on the format, depending on what foundation or what organization you go to. Are you going to continue this project at the end of the grant? And you need to have an answer to that. And it's okay to say no. I mean, if you were doing, let's say, you're going to do some cultural programs over 3 summers. That's fine. Tell the reviewer you're doing cultural programs over 3 summers, and maybe at the end of the 3rd summer, you will assess whether or not this is a program that's valuable enough to continue. That's a very legitimate answer. It's not necessarily a good answer to say, oh yeah, this is going to be so good, we're just going to continue it on forever. That's kind of transparent. You know, every program needs to be evaluated to make sure that it's really filling the needs that you may have set. So you need to answer the question, what happens at the end of the money? Here's an example. Years ago when I was at Field Museum, Kellogg Foundation gave 3 major museums a big chunk of money to develop educational programs. 2 of the museums used their money to underwrite the programs they already had and drop the admission charge for those programs to 0. Field Museum, which is where I was, used that money to build infrastructure and marketing for programs, kids through adults, for which there was a moderate fee. At the end of the third year, guess what happened? Those other two museums, their programs went belly up because they had taught their audiences not to value them because they were free. Field Museum, because it used that money to build infrastructure, at the end of the third year, there was no change in price. People expected to pay for those programs because they'd been doing it for 3 years. So that they were able to sustain those programs in a much better way than the other two institutions were able to do. Therein lies an important point. Okay. And funders certainly want to see, to this last point, that your institution, your board, and your community are committed to the project. So when you get to the point where you're evaluating whatever this project is, it's really good to have letters of support from the audiences that this program serves. Instead of you telling the funder, oh yeah, we're terrific, this really worked, isn't it much better to have the people who are in the program say, this is a terrific program, it really worked. It does make a difference. How are you monitoring the project during the implementation stage? Sometimes things don't work. You need to be able to adjust as you go. And what that means is, if you're going to have a grant-funded project, there needs to be a specific person who's in charge of that project. It's in a previous life, we called that the most responsible person, the MERP. Who's the MERP on your project? Because that's the person who's going to be required to monitor the program as it goes on. That's the person who may have to write up the final report for the funding agency to say, yes, indeed, we spent the money as we told you we're going to spend it, and here are the community letters that tell you what a great project this was. Okay. You also need to be able to have this person make sure that your project stays on time and on budget to the best of your ability. Now, again, things change. I've been on grant-funded projects, for example, where the head of the project actually left and went to another institution. So what do you do in that circumstance? Nothing? No. In this case, you contact the funder immediately and say, the project director has moved on to another job, and so is going to take their place. So you always keep the funder apprised of major changes in your project. You don't want to spring surprises on them, but I will also say it's better to let them know when you have solved the problem rather than simply saying you have a problem. So I wouldn't contact the funder and say, oh no, the project director's left, what are we going to do? It's much better to say, project director's left, so-and-so is going to step into their position, here are their credentials. Problem solved. You've alleviated a problem for the donor. Okay? What does your summative evaluation say about the success of the project? Well, this also implies that you are doing summative evaluation. And that's one that I think is both formative and summative evaluations, that you need to do that if you really want to be an institution that learns from its own work. I think it's critical. Okay, and to have in your proposal a discussion of what the formative evaluation is, and formative, in case you're not familiar with that term, formative simply means that you're doing some audience survey work before you do the project. Let's say you had a project where you wanted to work with middle school kids, and it was to learn about the history of your particular nation. Well, a formative way to test that would be to do a pre-test. Here are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, and you have a test that asks them specific pieces of knowledge that you're going to be covering in the program. And then what would your summative evaluation be, or at least part of it? It would be the same test after they completed the program. Is there a substantial difference between what they knew going in and what they know coming out? That's a good measure of an educational program. Not the only measure, but it's a good measure. Okay? it's also a good way to measure the effectiveness of the grant. If you can demonstrate that these kids, using this example, performed 50% better on the summative than the formative, then you can say, we think we spent the money well. It did what we asked, what we wanted to do, okay? It also may be that once you do this summative project, it will tell you what the next project ought to be, what the next grant proposal ought to be. Because not only will you have found some good things that your grant did, you're going to find some things that you wish you could do now with all of the new information that you've got. So essentially, one grant may lead to another grant. Has your institution learned anything about itself as a result of this project? This is what do I want to say? This is the introspective part of this process. I'm a firm believer that dynamic living institutions continually want to become better. And the way you become better is to assess what you're doing critically, not through rose-colored glasses, not everybody sitting around the table and saying, aren't we doing a great job? We're just a great bunch of people. Who does better than us? Well, that may make you feel good. It's not going to make you a better institution. So it's important to have an evaluation, a review at the end of a project to say, what did we learn? What came out the way we hoped it would? What came out maybe that was a surprise that we didn't know? Okay? Now, that part may never go in a grant proposal. That part may never go in a report to the funder. But it's important that you as a staff have that conversation, because you're the ones that are going to learn and benefit from whatever comes out of that. You may learn that you have a very effective institution, or you may learn that there are some things you may need to change. Well, then there's what I call the so what question. How will your institution be better because of this project? Why will anybody care? Well, dynamic institutions try to be better at what they do. They try to serve their audiences more effectively. They try to improve their efficiency and the effectiveness of whatever it is that they do. And trying to answer this so what question, I think, really is the sign of a healthy institution that's always looking to improve itself. What are the big mistakes that I've seen and that I've made in grant writing? Well, the first big mistake is by not following directions. If a funder says, I want 5 hard copies in 11-point font on yellow paper with 2-inch margins, what do you submit? That's what you submit. You don't make it up as you go along. If they say, here's what we want in this form, that's what you do. If you don't do that, you may have wasted a ton of work, because they may not even review your proposal. Okay? Not being specific about the request. Here's one that I find amazing. I have read a number of grant proposals, and sometimes I have to search through 1 or 2 pages to find out what they're asking for and how much money they're asking for. Here's the clue. Funders expect you're going to ask them for money. Don't be shy. The first sentence in the proposal should be, my organization is requesting X number of dollars from your foundation to do this project. State it up front and then back it up. But you're not gonna improve your chances by sneaking up on them and hiding the dollar amount on page 3. That's silly. It doesn't need to happen. Poor grammar and misspelled words. What I tell my students when we do this grant writing project as a class is we go through lots of phases. I will read multiple drafts, but I tell them for the final form of the proposal, I don't expect to see any typos. I don't expect any misspelled words, nothing. And that means don't rely on spell check, because spell check will only catch words that are misspelled. It will not catch wrong words that are spelled correctly. You know, so that's the deal. Now, truth be told, if you have one or two typos, it's not going to sink the boat. But I've read proposals where there were so many grammatical errors, so many typos, that I sort of forgot what the proposal was about. That is never a good idea. What else does that tell you about the institution? They may not have the capacity to do the project. If they can't even turn in a document without errors, how can they do this big project that has lots of moving parts? So the quality of the writing, and that doesn't mean you have to be Hemingway or you know, whoever. It simply means clear, concise, correct. Inconsistencies. If you're going to have a budget, probably you should have someone add up the columns, make sure they match. You know, I'm just saying, you don't want to say we need this much money in your narrative, and then in the budget it says another amount of money. I've actually seen that error. That's a bad thing. Your timeline, same thing, that you want everything to be consistent. I've already mentioned the too many adjectives, using jargon and acronyms and special terms, and promising too much. You're doing one project. You're not saving the world from hunger. You're not ending nuclear war. You're doing one project. So what is your one project going to do? And that's good enough. Best advice I've ever gotten, foundations are established to give away money, and they will tell you how to do it. Talk to the program officer at the foundation that you're interested in, and they'll be your guides and partners. As I mentioned, don't bury the ask. Don't be intimidated by the paper or the process. You know, when I've talked to students and when I've talked to colleagues in museums, there's this fear and this angst about writing a grant proposal. Well, you know, nobody learns from birth how to write iambic pentameter or haiku. Nobody learns how to write a successful novel or short story in the third grade. It's a skill that you develop over time. So is grant writing. It's a style of writing. And the more you do it, the better you will become. The more grant proposals you read written by other people, the better you will become. So it's a trainable skill. And you should approach that as, I can do this. I know how to do this. I'm capable of doing this. I may not know how now, but I'm capable of learning, and I'm going to ask good people for advice. And that's how you become a better grant writer. And that the more work you do on the project in advance, the easier it is to write the proposal. It is absolutely true. Writing a proposal is dead simple if you've done all of this other work in advance, and you have your little bullet points, and you have your preliminary timelines, and you have all of this information that you've worked out with the other people in the institution that you need. So writing the proposal is actually just putting stuff together in the right order and making it read well. It's a relatively simple act at that point. Best outcomes, writing competitive proposals becomes a routine for you or your institution. That you don't see this as a magic act, you see this as something that's very doable and you're capable. The grant writing process will teach you about your institution if you let it. And grants can set up a pattern of giving. Grant writing success positions your institution as a leader. Here's a question. If you're writing for an IMLS or an NEH grant, what's it worth? Is it worth the money you asked, or is it worth anything more than that? If you get an IMLS or an NEH grant, here's my point. That may have been a little obscure. Here's my point. That if you get an IMLS or an NEH grant, you are telling everyone that you are nationally competitive. It's a good project. It's being vetted at the highest levels, and that's going to encourage other potential funders. Well, if you got an IMLS, you guys know what you're doing. So think about that. Whenever you write some of these proposals, particularly to the federal agencies, and you get them, tell people about it. Tell your trustees, tell your community, tell your congressman that you've done this, because all of a sudden you are now in a higher category. You are on the national scene, not just the local or the regional scene. And part of that can be that if you are successful at writing these kinds of grants, that's going to leverage other gifts and grants. You will be seen as a leader. And and I don't mean that in, oh, look at me, I'm a leader. It means that you're doing good things for your community, you're doing them in a cost-effective manner and a professional manner. That, to me, is what leadership is. Okay, and that may be the last slide. And we have a little bit of time, so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yes, ma'am. If you go to the NEH website, you will see on the right column, actually you will see a whole series of programs within NEH, and then in the right column, it may give you sample grants. And they are only good grants. They don't give you bad grants to read. They only give you good grants. So yes, go to IMLS or NEH. If you look for a specific program, then usually they will have a selection of maybe 3 or 4 model proposals, and pay attention to those. Yeah. Anybody else? Actually, it's being recorded, and the young man who was here, who's right outside the door, they're making these proposals available on a basically a YouTube network. Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You can also volunteer to be a grant reviewer for
Yes.
IMLS.
Yeah.
It really teaches you what not to do.
Yeah, no, you're really right. If you think you want to be a grant writer, and I have to say I'm geeky enough, I kind of enjoy it, but I have a limited life. To read reviews or to read proposals for IMLS or NEH is really the best training you can get in grant writing. And what happens is they'll send you a stack, although now it's not even on a disk. You just have electronic access, and you will read those proposals and you will fill out answers to questions. And one of the challenges of being a reviewer is how to say negative things in a positive way. It would be impolite to say this proposal stinks on ice. You can't do that. But what you could say is this proposal would benefit from more consistent editing, from more detail in such and such an area. So the job of the grant reviewer is not to torpedo proposals, it's to encourage the grant writer to do better work. So again, the whole idea is to help you get the money and be a better grant writer. So yes, that's a very good thing to do. Anybody else? If not, then thank you.